All right, saints, let's go on now. We're in the book of Revelation, chapter 22, and we've been seeing these wonderful revelations. The Lord's just opening these things up, and we need to see them. We need to understand, because those on the broad road to destruction have distorted everything. We went through the small gate, which is Christ. We've stayed on the narrow way, which is Christ, and we have this life of him, and we're going to continue on that way. And it's so important to know where we're at, so important to follow where we're at and the things that happen, because they've been so distorted. But the Lord is just pouring his Spirit out upon me, and these things are wonderful and marvelous, and I'm trying to share them the best I can in these short messages. But we saw that the tribulation was over, and that at the Battle of Armageddon, we returned with Christ and put an end to those armies that were coming against Israel, the church in Israel. They were trying to put out that last life, that last light upon earth of God, which was the church in Israel as they accepted Christ as their Messiah. And we saw that the beast and the false prophet were thrown into the lake of fire. And then we saw in chapter 20 that Satan was bound. And it said he was going to be bound for 1,000 years, and then he would be released. And we saw that after that 1,000 years, in chapter 20, verse 7, that he was released. 1,000 years. And after that 1,000 years, he's released. And he goes out and deceives the nations again. Like I said, it's a wheel within a wheel. As long as you got man and God and Satan, this wheel within a wheel never stops turning. And Satan is there, and he's released again. And what happens here? Why does God allow these people to follow him again? Why do they? Because since the Garden of Eden, man has been given a choice. And once again, Satan has been bound. It's this 1,000-year millennium where Christ is ruling with us. We're ruling and reigning with Christ for 1,000 years upon the earth. And these are the people that were left at the end of the tribulation. Satan's been bound. Christ is ruling with a rod of iron. They haven't been given a choice. And now Satan's released. They've been with Christ in his kingdom for 1,000 years. And Satan's released. And a huge part of them follow Satan again. They took that choice to follow Satan. And again, in verse 9, and fire came down from heaven and devoured them. They were devoured and destroyed those that followed Satan. And Satan was thrown into the lake of fire. And as it says at the end of verse 10, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So now Satan, we got to follow these things, see these things, get this revelation. Now, at the end of the 1,000 years, those that followed Satan have been destroyed. There's still billions of people upon earth. That life is going on. And now Satan is bound forever and ever. So we're going through this drastic change. And we saw in verse 11 that the great white throne, the judgment, and so many on the broad road to destruction try to tell you that everybody is judged there. And then they're all that weren't saved are thrown in the lake of fire. It didn't say that, because we saw in verse 11, and I saw a great white throne and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away. Like we said, this isn't it gone. This is earth and heaven fled away. What's it saying there? That those that still alive on the earth, they have nothing to do with it. Because it says in verse 12, and I saw the dead. The dead were brought to be judged, not the ones that were still alive. So this is making this great divide here. Heaven, earth and heaven, the presence of them, it's fleeing away because it's being divided. Those that are still alive upon the earth are still on the earth. This judgment has nothing to do with them. Heaven, the saints, the kingdom of God, we who are been for 1,000 years ruling and reign with him, it has nothing to do with that. There's this big great divide. They're separated, and neither one of them have anything to do with this white throne judgment, because it says, and I saw the dead. The dead were the ones that were judged, and they were judged because these are the ones that haven't received Christ, don't know him. And they and death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire, and anyone's name who was not in the book of life. And so they try to tell you that's even the living. No, it didn't say that. The only ones there were the dead. They were judged. And then we came to chapter 21. And remember, we said, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. And we said that word for new isn't something brand new. It means something restored back to its original. It's like one word for new in the original would be, you go out in your driveway and there's a brand new car there. You've never seen it, you never had it, you never even seen one, and it's yours. It's a brand new car sitting there. That is not what this word new is. There's another word for new, which this word is. You go out there on your driveway and an old Chevy you had parked in the back of the garage that needed restored, that was in terrible shape, is sitting there totally restored. That's what this new is. So I saw a new heaven and a new earth, this restored heaven, this restored earth. And now we got to see something. We're coming to another divide, another change here. You got to see this. You got to have this light, this life to understand the end of this word. Because now Satan is permanently bound. Satan is permanently bound. There's a new heaven and a new earth. Like we said in the last message, John was just seeing the tribulation, the end of the tribulation. Then he saw Satan bound for 1,000 years, and he almost sees nothing. There's just this, that all of a sudden Satan's released and they come up. So that's all John saw. 1,000 years he knew passed, but he saw nothing. He saw that judgment at the end of that 1,000 years, that great white throne judging the dead. And then he sees this, and I saw. And then John realizes there's a new heaven and a new earth. He saw a new heaven and a new earth. It's like if you were seeing an image, a picture of some area that had been deteriorated, destroyed, had great trauma or destruction come over it, like from a tornado or a hurricane, let's say. And then you're going on and they're talking about it, and that's the last thing you've seen. And then they show you and they're talking about some other things. All of a sudden, you see a picture again, and it's 1,000 years later. Well, the trouble, the devastation, the damage of that hurricane would be long gone. That's what happened with John here. It's not a new heaven and new earth. That ain't the words that are here. It's restored. It's brought back to its original state, what God meant it to be after 1,000 years. And John sees that. Wow, it's a new heaven and new earth. Like if you were in Florida and there was a devastating hurricane and you're seeing it and talking about it, all of a sudden you see a picture of it 1,000 years later and you go, wow, it's a new Florida. It's the same Florida. That's what those words mean here. And in verse 2, and I saw the holy city. See, we're having this new divide here. Heaven and earth and heaven are being mentioned. There's still people alive on earth. The dead have been judged. Verse 2, 21:2. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. Listen, saints, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. We're that bride. We're the bride of Christ. That just before the end of the tribulation, we went to the marriage supper. We returned with him. We're now his wife. So what's John seeing here? He sees this holy city. Things are being divided here. Heaven and earth and heaven. You still have billions, probably many billions of people alive on the earth that didn't follow Satan, They had nothing to do with the great white throne judgment. They already made their choice. They didn't follow Satan. And they're still on earth. And now John sees, wow, the earth is restored after that 1,000 years. Everything's new. It's the way it was meant to be. And now he says, and now the next verse, I saw, here he goes again, I saw again, and I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from heaven from God. A lot of people try to say it's suspended in heaven because it's so big, so mass, and the wording would give you the impression it's coming down, not that it landed. What they don't see here, saints, is we have those that weren't killed by that fire, that didn't follow Satan. They're still on earth. There's a revelation for you. And now what he's seeing here is the holy city. It seems suspended because we have our new bodies. We've had them for 1,000 years. And he's seeing that. Here's the earth side. Those that are still alive that didn't follow Satan, they chose God, and they're still alive on earth. I don't know what their structure, condition, how God looks at that, but they're still there. Now John's seeing the holy city. Why does it seem suspended? Why does it all seem mystical? Because those on earth are of the flesh. They still have the flesh in this life. We in heaven, at this point, and long before this, have our new bodies. Look at this. This goes, another thing the Lord showed me today. It goes so perfectly with this. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, starting in verse 35. 1 Corinthians 15, starting in verse 35, where Paul's talking about the resurrection. But someone will say, how are the dead raised? Now, first, Paul's talking about the dead. But in verse 51 of the same chapter, he says, behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep. We shall not all die, but we will all be changed. So he's tying these two things together, the ones that will be raptured and the ones that die naturally. But someone will say, how are the dead raised? And with what kind of body do they come? You fool, that which is sown does not come to life until it dies. And that which you sow, you do not sow the body which is to be, but a bare grain, perhaps of wheat or something. He's saying you don't take like a whole stalk of corn and lay it in the ground and you're going to get another stalk of corn. You take a seed. That seed becomes a stalk of corn and bears fruit. Verse 38, but God gives it a body. Listen to this, saints. But God gives it a body just as he wishes, and to each the seeds a body of its own. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one flesh of men, another flesh of beasts, another flesh of birds, and another flesh of fish. Verse 40, there are also, here we go, saints, there are also heavenly bodies and earthly bodies. This again applies these things. The word of God is a wheel within a wheel. Nothing changes. This is right here. What he just said. There are also heavenly bodies and there are earthly bodies. We have the same thing right now, and we're going to see them, the difference between them. We have the people on earth that did not follow Satan. They're still alive. That's the earthly. That's the natural. And what did he say? There are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies. What we're going to go on to in chapters 21 and 22, and where we see here, and I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. This is the saints. We're the bride. Everybody on the broad road to destruction, all these prophecy teachers, these book of Revelation teachers, everything's natural. These things are spiritual. We do have, as it said in verse 40, 1 Corinthians, the earthly body, those that are still there. But there's also the heavenly bodies. That's what we're going to have in chapters 21 and 22 mostly. It's the heavenly, the bride of Christ, the living temple of God. That's what we have here. Going back to 1 Corinthians, verse 40 again. There are also heavenly bodies and earthly bodies. You see that right there between chapters 20 and 21 of Revelations. But the glory of the heavenly, those with their heavenly bodies, born again, changed. But the glory of the heavenly bodies is one, and the glory of the earthly is another. These heavenly bodies are different. We're going to be different. We know that. So many Christians just think they're going to go to heaven, sit on a cloud, and they're going to be just like they are now. They don't realize we're going to be changed. Like I said, my wife and I saw that vision of the Lord where we were in our living room. And I was telling my wife, I have to know if this is him. I hear him speaking to me, but everybody's saying it's not him. Don't listen to that. And I sat there on the couch and I told her, I got to know if it's him. And then I heard him again. And he said, John. And I said to my wife, oh man, I can actually hear him. He said, John. And then I hear him again. And he says, John, not only did I forgive you, and then he stopped. And I'm sitting there and I said, Rose. Now he said, John, not only did I forgive you. And then I'm sitting there and he goes, but John, not only did I forgive you, but I made a way for you to be forgiven. And I looked back at my wife and I says, I can hear him. He said, not only did he forgive me, but he made a way for me to be forgiven. And then I'm just sitting there again in amazement. And he goes, John, not only did I make a way for you to be forgiven, but I am the way. Think of the implications, the word of that, saints. But I am the way that was made for you to be forgiven. And I look at my wife and I says, Rose, he said again, not only did he forgive me, but he made a way for me to be forgiven, and that he is the way. And then it just ended. And I looked at my wife and she jumped up and ran out of the house. This was late at night. And I went running after her. And she didn't want to come. She just kept crying and crying. And I brought her back into the house and I said, what's the matter? And she said, John, when you said I have to know it's him, and then he walked through the wall. He come not through the door, right next to the door. It looked like a regular human being, but he walked through the door. See, he had a new body, a different body. That's what we will have, a different body, a heavenly body. And she said he looked like he did when he was crucified. He was talking to you about forgiving you, the forgiveness, and he looked like he did when he was crucified. So in that body that was able to walk through the wall and her to be able to see him as crucified. But she said, John, when you said, I can hear him, he said, John, he went over and whispered in your ear. I couldn't hear what he was saying. She said that to me. I couldn't hear what he was saying. He put his hands over your ear. And then you said to me, he said, John. And then it went on through that conversation. John, not only have I forgiven you. And then she goes, he would whisper in your ear. I couldn't hear what he was saying. You would say to me, he said, John, not only have I forgiven you. And that went on and she saw it back and forth. See, that was him, his heavenly body, and able to speak to me, looking like he did when he was crucified. We're going to have a new body. And if you want to see more about that vision, that open vision, in my playlist, I have 2 or 3 messages in there about that open vision. But here we got to go on with this revelation of the Son of the living God. So he had that new body. We're going to have a new body. Everybody looks at it as natural. It's being separated here. Verse 40, there are also heavenly bodies and earthly bodies. It's right here, the earthly bodies, those that didn't follow Satan, they're still on earth. Heavenly bodies, us that are ruling and reigning with him, now for over 1,000 years. That's the divide that's going here. And he says in verse 41 of Corinthians, There is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, another glory of the stars, and stars differ from stars in glory. What that's saying is when you get to heaven, you'll have Christ. He's the sun that's shining. The apostles will have great light coming from them, and it'll get down to lesser and lesser light. How well you knew him, how you walked with him, how you presented your body a living sacrifice. You came to the cross, is how much that light will shine from you. In verse 42, so also in the resurrection of the dead. It is sown a perishable body, it is raised an imperishable body. So we see this heaven and earth in that resurrection. That's what you're seeing here in a beautiful little picture. Those that are still alive on earth in the natural body, that didn't follow Satan, they're still alive. And in verse 21, John sees the heavens and the earth, the sky, it's not heaven. The sky is cleansed, the earth is cleansed. After that 1,000 years under Christ's rule and reign, it's been brought back to what it was meant to be. And then he goes on, and I saw the holy city. Now we're coming to the spiritual body. Now we're coming to the saints. We've seen the natural, the earthly. And in chapter 21 and 22, we're going to go more on into the spiritual. We'll touch on the natural, the earthly. We're going to see that. But John sees this holy city, New Jerusalem. We're the temple of God. That's God's purpose. This city seems to be hovering. It doesn't seem to be touching the earth because it's spiritual. Just like right now, the Lord's here. Angels are here. Devils can be coming after you. You don't see them. They're in another realm. They're in another place. That's what this is. They're still the natural earth and earth's people. But we're in the spiritual. We're above that. We're in a different realm, a different place. That's what we're going to see in chapter 21 and 22. Verse 3, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is amongst men. And that word men there means natural men. It means men as a race, as a human being. The broad road to destruction, they want to tell you that's all over. That even those that didn't follow Satan got judged. We saw it didn't say that. It said the dead got judged. They're still here. Verse 3, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is amongst men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be amongst them. You might think, well, how can that be? Somehow, in a different sense, maybe tomorrow God will open that up to me. But these people are still here. Satan is bound. They're not going to be tempted. Remember in the Garden of Eden, see it's a wheel within a wheel. What's the first thing that's happening once God is made man? There's Satan tempted him. What's he saying? Did God say? Satan's right there. But now you still have people on earth, but Satan is bound forever and ever. And these people will go on. What's going to be the relationship? We'll see that some as we move on. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is amongst men. These are natural men. It means human beings, not the saints. It doesn't say that. And he shall dwell amongst them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be amongst them. Satan's bound. It's like the Garden of Eden before Satan. That's where we're going. The Garden of Eden before Satan. In verse 4, and he shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall no longer be any death, and there shall no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. Here we are with this passed away again. It's the same thing we saw over here earlier. It's passing away in the same sense you were born again. It's all still there, but the crying, the pain, the misery, the death, they've passed away. So these people are here, and they're not going to weep or mourn or cry anymore. And they try to tell you on the broad road to destruction, no, that's talking about the saints. The saints ain't going to be crying, weeping, or mourning. It's about 1,000 years later. We haven't been crying, weeping, or mourning since we died and were resurrected, or since we were raptured, and that was long ago. Verse 5, and he who sits on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. This again is the exact same word in the original from chapter 21, verse 1. New as in restored. He could have put the word there, new as in something that was never there. It means restoring the original. And he who sits on the throne said, behold, I am making all things restored. Restored to what? The Garden of Eden. You're going to see that as we go through these last two chapters, that are another wonderful, glorious, powerful revelation of the Son of the living God. And he said, write, for these words are faithful and true. And he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. So we have to see that transition we've come to. We're going to see some glorious, powerful revelations that you haven't seen because they're on the broad road to destruction. They entered the wide gate and they're on the broad road to destruction. They can't see this life. We're going to see it. God's opening this up, and all you can do for me is help me get these messages out. I'm not making these things up. I'm sitting here in the wilderness, but my wife and I by ourselves snowed in for 5 months. And we're just making these messages and getting them out. Please try to share them. But we've come to this place now. Those people are still on earth that didn't follow Satan. They took a choice to follow God. The ones that followed Satan were destroyed with Satan in that fire. Satan's permanently bound now forever and ever. He'll never be back. We're back to the beginning of the Garden of Eden, and we're going to see that. And we have a new heaven and a new earth. John sees that after 1,000 years, wow, I looked, it's brand new. Like there was last time I was here 1,000 years ago, a giant hurricane went through here and destroyed it. But now, hey, I'm back 1,000 years later. This is brand new. It's not brand new as if it was never there. It's restored. And now we've come to this new heaven and this new earth. Like it said about our new bodies. There's one that's heavenly. There's one that's natural. I never knew this. I never understood this. I don't think many have. These people are still upon earth. And they're the earthly, the natural. But Satan is bound. We're the spiritual. We're the heavenly. We're this holy city, this new Jerusalem, the bride of Christ, the temple of God, which is coming down, where God will be with man. And we'll continue on in the book of Revelation in the next message.